There are moments in history that don't arrive with fanfare. They arrive quietly, with the scratch of a pen on paper, in a room most people will never see, decided by people who will never fully explain why. This was one of those moments. The document was simple. The language was formal. But what it meant, for a woman who had once stood on the steps of Windsor Castle as a royal bride, who had worn the titles and the tiaras and smiled for the cameras of the entire world, was anything but simple. When the ink dried, something was over. Something that had once seemed permanent had been erased. And the man who signed it was not a stranger. He was her brother-in-law, the future King of England. The story of Meghan Markle and the British royal family has always been one of contrasts. From the very beginning, it carried within it the seeds of something complicated, a love story layered over an institution that does not bend easily, a woman who did not come from the world she was entering, and a family that had spent centuries perfecting the art of saying very little while meaning everything. When Meghan first appeared at Prince Harry's side, the public responded with warmth. She was different. She was charismatic. She brought something fresh to a monarchy that had, for years, struggled to feel relevant to younger generations. People were drawn to her in a way they hadn't been drawn to a royal newcomer in a long time. The comparisons to Diana were immediate, whether anyone wanted them or not. But institutions have long memories. The royal family, the palace, as it is so often called, is not simply a family. It is a structure. It is centuries of protocol, unwritten rules, careful silences, and managed appearances. Every smile at a public engagement is deliberate. Every word in a press statement is chosen. Every title, every honor, every privilege that comes with wearing the name Windsor is attached to something larger than any individual. And that structure does not accommodate disruption easily. When Meghan and Harry began to push against it, publicly, loudly, in ways that could not be quietly managed, the institution did what institutions do. It began the slow, careful process of drawing its lines more clearly. The decision to strip Meghan of her HRH, her Royal Highness status, did not happen overnight. It was the product of months, and in some ways years, of tension that had been building beneath the surface of royal life. The couple's departure from their senior royal duties in early 2020, what became known to the press and the public simply as Megxit, was the public moment that marked the break. Harry and Meghan stepped back. They moved first to Canada, then to the United States. They gave up their roles, their official duties, their access to public funding for security. But the question of their titles remained. The palace announced that in stepping away from royal life, they would no longer use their HRH styles. It was framed carefully, as most things in that world are framed, not a punishment, not a stripping. Simply the natural result of no longer being working members of the family. But words matter, and the distinction between a title that exists on paper and a title that is actively used matters enormously in the world of monarchy. Meghan had become the Duchess of Sussex through her marriage to Harry, and she would remain the Duchess. But HRH, the prefix that places a person within the active, working circle of the crown, was gone. For many watching from the outside, it seemed like a technical detail. Inside the institution, it was anything but. HRH is not simply a courtesy. It is a signal of belonging. It indicates that a person is of and within the royal family in its official, functioning sense. Without it, the title that remains Duchess becomes something closer to a historical artifact. A courtesy granted by marriage, but emptied of its institutional weight. In the years that followed the initial departure, the relationship between Harry and Meghan and the rest of the royal family deteriorated in ways that were very publicly documented. The couple's interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021 was a turning point that no one could walk back from. In that interview, allegations were made that shook the palace, claims of institutional racism, of a lack of support for Meghan's mental health, of concerns raised about the skin color of their then-unborn son Archie. The palace issued a response that acknowledged the concerns while also carefully noting that some recollections may differ. It was the kind of statement that is designed to say something without really saying anything, and it satisfied almost no one. Prince William's response to that moment was watched closely. He and Harry had once been close, genuinely close, in the way that two brothers who had lost their mother young and had grown up under the weight of extraordinary public scrutiny can be close. The image of them walking behind their mother's coffin at Diana's funeral in 1997 remains one of the most heartbreaking photographs of the modern royal era. They had built something together in those years, a bond, a shared understanding of what it meant to carry the name Windsor and all that came with it. But by 2021, that bond had frayed in ways that were visible to anyone paying attention. When Harry made allegations in the opera interview, William was asked about it publicly at an engagement shortly afterward. His response, brief, controlled, firm, was that the family was not racist. It was not an invitation to further conversation. Harry's memoir, Spare, published in January 2023, deepened the rupture significantly. In it, Harry described in detail alleged conversations, confrontations, and incidents involving members of the royal family, including William. He described a physical altercation with his brother. He described conversations in which he felt unheard, dismissed, and unsupported. He described the palace machinery working against him and his wife in ways that he believed were deliberate. The book sold in extraordinary numbers. It was the most pre-ordered nonfiction book in the history of its publisher. And it did what such books always do. It forced the people named within it into an impossible position. Respond and validate it. Stay silent and appear to confirm it. Neither path was clean. William said nothing publicly about the specific allegations in the book. The palace released a brief statement noting that the issues raised would be addressed privately. And then the institution moved forward, as it always has moved forward, by continuing to function. Engagements continued. Duties were carried out. William and Catherine appeared at events with the calm, practiced ease of people who have spent their entire lives learning how to be present in public, even when everything around them is complicated. The question of what would happen to Harry and Meghan's titles, specifically whether their positions would be reviewed, had been a matter of quiet speculation within royal circles for some time. As long as King Charles remained on the throne and remained willing to allow the status quo to continue, the formal structure of their titles would remain as they were. Harry would keep his Duke of Sussex title. Meghan would remain the Duchess, and neither would use HRH in an active working sense. But the death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022 changed the dynamics in ways that were not immediately obvious to those outside the institution. The accession of King Charles III meant a new monarch, a new court, and inevitably a fresh review of where every person in the extended family stood. It was within this context, the broader restructuring of the monarchy under Charles, the ongoing public conflict with Harry and Meghan, and the increasing need for clarity about who was and was not a working royal, that the question of Meghan's HRH status came into sharper focus. Reports began to emerge from within royal circles that discussions were taking place at a senior level about whether the couple's titles should be formally revisited. Not simply continued in their current ambiguous state, but reviewed, clarified, and potentially ended in a more formal and definitive way. William's role in this process was, in the nature of these things, difficult to pin down precisely. He is not yet the king. He is the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, a man who operates within an institution that he will one day lead. His influence on decisions made within the palace is real but rarely direct, rarely visible. He does not issue decrees in the way that a monarch does. He speaks in the private conversations that shape institutional decisions. He carries weight not because of formal authority he currently holds, but because of the authority he is moving toward. When William has a view on something, the palace knows it. And when the palace acts on something, his position within those decisions is rarely far from the surface. The signing of what was characterized internally as the formal confirmation of the removal of Meghan's HRH styling was not a single dramatic moment. It was the culmination of a long institutional process. Documents were reviewed. Legal counsel was sought. The formalities of how such a change would be implemented, and how it would be communicated, if indeed it was communicated publicly at all, were worked through with the kind of careful, deliberate attention that the palace applies to anything that touches on matters of this sensitivity. It was decided that the change would be made quietly, not announced at a press conference, not signaled with a formal royal decree in the old, theatrical sense. Simply done, reflected in official documentation, confirmed through the appropriate channels, and allowed to settle into the institutional record without the drama that the public might have anticipated. For Meghan, living in Montecito, California, with Harry and their 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, the change was, at least officially, something that had already been anticipated. She had not been using the HRH styling. She had not presented herself as an active working royal. She had built her life, her identity, and her public platform outside of the institution. Her Archuel Foundation, the Netflix deal, the various projects and partnerships she and Harry had developed. None of them relied on the HRH. In that sense, the formal confirmation of what was already functionally true changed very little in her day-to-day reality. But symbolically, it was significant. The HRH once granted represents a connection to the crown that is not easily severed. Its removal, however gently handled, however quietly processed, is a statement. It says that the institution has drawn a line, that on one side of that line is the working royal family, the people who carry the crown's responsibilities as their primary purpose. And on the other side is everyone else, including those who once stood within that circle and chose, or were nudged, to leave it. Meghan is now firmly on that other side, not because she is unloved or unimportant or without a life of significance, but because the institution has said, in the clear language of titles and formalities, that she is no longer of it. William's connection to this moment matters in the longer view. He will be king. The decisions being made now about who belongs in the royal family's inner circle, about which titles carry active meaning and which are historical echoes, about how the monarchy will define itself to a world that is watching more closely and more critically than ever before. These decisions will shape the institution he inherits. His willingness to let the process move forward, to be associated with its outcome even if his hand was never publicly raised, tells something important about the kind of monarch he intends to be. He is not a man who makes decisions impulsively. He is deliberate, careful, and deeply protective of the institution he has been raised to serve. The relationship between the two brothers remains what it has been for some years now, strained, unresolved, and carried largely in silence. There have been no public reconciliations. There have been brief moments, the funeral of Prince Philip, the unveiling of a statue of Princess Diana, where they appeared in the same space and managed to be civil. But the warmth that once existed between them, the easy partnership that the public saw in their early charity work together, has not returned. Whether it ever will is a question that neither man has answered publicly, and perhaps has not answered privately either. What remains at the end of this particular chapter is clarity of a kind. The institution has defined its boundaries. The family has made its decisions, quietly and without ceremony, as it almost always does. Meghan Markle, who arrived in this story as a bride in a fairy tale gown on a spring afternoon in Windsor, who walked those ancient corridors and sat in those formal rooms and tried, by most available accounts, to make it work within the walls of an institution unlike anything she had known. She is now, officially and finally, outside those walls, not as an enemy. Not as a scandal, but as someone who was once inside and is now not. And the man who represents the future of those walls, the man who will one day be king, has, in his quiet and institutional way, helped to make it so.